Welcome back to the class, everyone. A couple of years ago, I could have made a video excluding Galactic Legends for GAC and said, hey, most of these teams are fairly accessible. Well, congratulations to all of us, because now we have a top 10 non-Galactic Legend team for GAC, and they're expensive. So that was just one of the things that I took note of in this when reviewing which teams would be the top 10 best in GAC without including Galactic Legends. Now, if you're wondering where the idea or the inspiration for this video came from, it all stems from the fact that we just did our ranking for Galactic Legends within Grand Arena. So I say that because that's also going to be why Bane does not appear on this list, because we have essentially considered him a Galactic Legend, despite the fact that he doesn't actually have the tag. The other thing that I want to note from the previous video is that different from that one, this one will not have the teams scaled out against each other. Rather, they are more so all on their own tier. And while there are some teams here that are stronger than others, and I will try to point that out when applicable, this isn't meant to be a hard and fast list of Queen Amidala is better than Gungans. Gungans are better than Sith Empire. It's just meant to all say that they're all kind of on the same level. Now, with that being said, the reason why they're all on this level is because they meet one of the following three criteria. Either A, they can beat Galactic Legends, kind of like the Inquisitors can just take out JML or JMK, or B, they're going to consistently call out a Galactic Legend counter, like Darth Treya, or C, they can only be beaten or are beating other characters of the same level. So Gungans, for example, aren't typically used on offense to beat Galactic Legends, nor are they being beaten by them on defense, but you're taking Bo-Katan to beat them, who would otherwise be beating Lord Vader, or you're beating them with the Sith Trio, which is, again, requiring Sith Eternal or someone to beat it on defense. So that's really where these 10 teams come from. And without further ado, into the actual list, we have none other than Queen Amidala. And I know I said I wasn't ranking these from 1 to 10, but if I was to rank them, Queen Amidala would have to be number 1. The team is just an absolute menace overall on defense, and it's really not worthless on offense. In fact, it's probably quite underrated on offense. Defensively speaking, most people's go-to counter is Bane, which again, we're considering a Galactic Legend, so very high level. And even some of the other counters that can beat it, like Great Mothers, are fairly nuanced and can highly depend on which units are in the squad. For example, if you were to replace Shock with Bad Batch Echo, who can be either very fast or with a turn meter Datacron, it can kind of screw up Great Mothers for the most part. You can also use Inquisitors to beat them, but if you can't get the Death Mark to land in the way you want it to and be able to kill them quickly, PAL will just kind of delete your whole squad. So again, very optimal on defense and can still do a lot of fun things on offense. I've only done it once or twice, but using them against Jabba and having PAL just one-shot Boosh right under protection on an AoE is a very satisfying feeling, because if you can't ignore the taunt, just go through it. Next up are going to be Gungans, and as we previously said, Gungans aren't typically beating a lot of Galactic Legends on offense, and really they're only calling out JML as far as overall defensive viability goes. But they are pretty much either demanding Bo-Katan or Great Mothers or another team of similar caliber to take them out. They can occasionally hold against them, but a lot of that comes down to their own RNG having to work in their favor. Offensively, again, not where they're typically used, but they can be used in that sense against Balin. You are just kind of taking on some RNG risk when doing so, because not only do you need the Death Mark to land on the right character with Jar Jar's basic, but you need to make sure that there isn't a character there to immediately cleanse it, like L3, so that can be a little bit comp dependent. Next up is going to be Sith Empire, and notice I said Sith Empire and not specifically Malgus, because there are some instances where Darth Revan leadership actually can come in handy. Right now, the main counter that they're probably used against is Great Mothers, which can be messed up if people are putting Marin in there, but for the most part, works very well. And even when on defense, one of the things that's been happening a lot, I know it's a Datacron, but both in the current Datacron set and in the previous one, so about, I think, 6 to 8 months, we've had a tank revive cron. The reason why that's important is because it, not impossible, but it becomes very difficult for a Cal Kestis team without Jedi Master Luke to actually be able to take them down, because sure, go ahead and use the insta-kill on Malgus, he'll come right back, he'll heal with debuffs. It's hard to get him down unless you have a specific strategy worked out with, say, Mace or Giant Luke to be able to reduce his max health. But even then, Giant Luke is a little bit limited that. So again, both good uses on offense and defense. Speaking of actually one of the good uses for offense of Sith Empire is actually against Inquisitors. Now, Inquisitors are one of the they deserve to be on the list, but they're one of the more slanted teams here in the sense that their offensive and their defensive viability is completely different. Offensively, like we said before, they're taking down squads like JMK, JML, Queen Amidala in some circumstances, Balin in other circumstances where they're leveraging the death mark against the fact that they don't have any way to stop max health damage, much like Gungans. Their issue is, as long as there aren't any specific Datacron shenanigans happening, Phoenix with a pre-taunt are still a pretty good counter against them. You are subject to the RNG of whether or not your daze is going to land on all of them, and that can actually be stopped even with tenacity down by the 15% chance to resist, but it's still an option and a Hail Mary for a lot of the smaller accounts out there that don't have something really big like Seer Malicos, who we'll talk about here in a second, to just completely tear them apart by throwing rocks at them. Speaking of throwing rocks and tearing Malicos, they are going to be our next team. I mentioned this previously in another video, but pretty much any raid comp that becomes too difficult for Starkiller to take out, Terran Malicos shows up on the scene, sometimes with Starkiller on as well, but sometimes not, and just kind of has their number. And then again, he just fits overall well into the rest of these teams as to what they can take out. Inquisitors being a really good example. I can't remember the last time I used rocks and I didn't kill everyone. I guess there might have been one time where Fifth Brother had damage immunity and that kind of stopped it. But overall, an expensive Omicron team, but a really, really good team. Next up is going to be Balin, and I might be exaggerating or overrating his overall viability right now, because one of the more popular Datacrons to put on several different teams is the Fulcrum Cron that gives her a ton of bonus turns. The reason why I mention that is because he has very, very specific anti-Ahsoka, not Galactic Legend synergy. So Fulcrum, a normal Ahsoka Tano or Snips, as well as Commander Ahsoka Tano. So if people put Fulcrum with Rey, he's beating Rey. If people put Fulcrum with Ahsoka, he's beating Ahsoka. If people have Cat and Snips on a JMK team, he's beating that. So a lot of really fantastic uses on offense. And quite frankly, the team is very scary on defense. I've listed a few counters so far in the video, and I've probably also lost with them. One of the things that will happen if you can't gain control against them right in the beginning, which, by the way, they have like a 20% chance to dodge. That sucks, because that's just high enough to wreck you every once in a while. And if they do dodge and they're able to build up their Soldiers of Fortune, they're going to get a ton of defense penetration and then crit damage and crit chance through Shin, and they're just going to rip you all apart in one giant AoE. Unfortunately, I've been on the losing side of that match several times, which is another reason why they're on this list. Next up is Bo-Katan Mandalore, the official Lord Vader counter, also beats Gungans. Most people aren't putting them on defense, but even when you do, they're going to call probably at a bare minimum Sith Eternal. I can't really think of any other counter, but at the same time, they're not really a comp that's left on defense all that much. Next up is going to be Great Mothers and her squad. Now, I did mention at the very beginning of this video that most of these teams are just really expensive. I want to give a shout out to Great Mothers because she is just about the only team on here that isn't reliant on at least one GAC Omicron at all. You can apply Morgans and it's fine, but at the same time, the team just functions. It functions well enough without it. The same can't be said for Bo-Katan Mandalore. If you don't have the Revive Cron, Lord Vader can snipe her out right in the very beginning, and then you're done. Balin, if you do not have the Ahsoka Tano, or rather his leadership Omicron, you lose all that anti-Ahsoka Tano synergy that I talked about. You go up against Inquisitors, you lose the death mark on Reva. Malgus's whole kit is trapped behind pretty much his leadership Omicron, and so on and so forth. Great Mother doesn't really have such weaknesses, and she can just do a lot of great things without that. We talked about some of her offensive viability, specifically being able to beat Queen Amidala as well as Gungans, and defensively, especially if you put Marin in the squad, you can even start stopping or deterring, to a certain extent, the Sith Empire and Lord Vader counters. And even if you can't, those are two pretty hefty squads, and that's good enough in my book to be here. Starkiller, as we previously mentioned, is beating most of the old school raid teams, especially if you're not up too high in the divisions and overall in GAC. They do also beat some other squads. I know that Zareth has pretty well fine-tuned them against Jabba, so really not useless by any standards. Do fall a little bit short on defense. I haven't seen them there in a really long time, but last I checked, as long as there aren't any Datacron shenanigans, Grievous can still beat them pretty easily, or if troopers do have Datacron shenanigans with turn meter or buffs, they can also take them out. Next is going to be the Sith Trio. Now, I gave a special note to Great Mothers in the fact that they don't really require any Omicron, and that's fantastic. Trey is also one of the more accessible teams in the fact that the characters are now all, or they can all be farmed for twice as much. They're all accelerated. And then Trey herself, through raid currency, has become way more accessible. And the team, even as far as Kyrotech go, is pretty much just limited to Darth Talon, who really isn't even mandatory on the squad. So basically what I'm getting at is the squad is cheap. It's really cheap to pretty much consistently be calling out a Galactic Legend on defense or beating a newer squad like Gungans on offense. So overall, just a fantastic team that doesn't require, outside of Omicrons, much investment. Now, I know I said top 10 non-Galactic Legend teams in GAC, which is a mouthful to keep saying, but as an honorable mention, I do want to talk about General Skywalker. General Skywalker didn't make top 10 because there were 10 teams above him that I thought were better, but he's really, really close. And one of the things that I think is hindering him the most that we'll put in here is for him to do a lot of the really cool things that he wants to do, like beat Queen Amidala or not be beaten by CLS on defense. He needs cracks, which is a bit awkward because one of the whole reasons why we made both this video and the Galactic Legend video is because I'm trying to map out the all best 50 teams in game and where they rank. And if Phoenix is to exist and to do the things that they want to do, you really can't make that compromise. In fact, Krex isn't just good with Phoenix, he's good with Leia, he's good with several different squads. So if you are willing to part with him and can put him here, he really does rank among the top 10 because, again, he's able to beat some of these squads in here or require them to be used against him. So a little bit more nuanced. He does have to steal a little bit to kind of make a super team, but he is pretty much in the same general area. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know what your experiences have been with these top 10 or 11 teams. And until the next time, stay awesome.